We came for salvation. We came for family. We came for all that's good. That's how we'll walk away.
Aloha and welcome to the Layman's Lounge podcast, which is a ministry of the laymanslounge.com, where we exist to bring everyday theology to encourage Christians for everyday life. So we're talking about playing hacky sack, trying not to argue with your neighbor about the parking spot, grilling up some ribs, that sort of thing. I'm Jason Estopanol. I'm a business process analyst and a YWAMer here in Kona, Hawaii. And on the other line is the Reverend Dr. Craig Bartholomew. Yes, he's an Anglican priest. He is director of the Kirby Lang Center for Christian Ethics. So we're going to call that CLICE at Tyndale House, Cambridge. And I just want to hit you with this one-liner about CLICE that I heard in an interview Dr. Bartholomew say. He said, CLICE is about life, a celebration of life. And I love it. So super informally, can you give our listeners just a quick snapshot of what you guys do and hope to achieve at CLICE?
Yes, so CLICE is based in Cambridge in the UK, and our mission is to bring the gospel in relation to all aspects of life. So we have the word ethics in our name, but the way we define ethics is not, people often think of ethics, if they use the word at all, it's a bit of a weird word, as hot button issues. Now, of course, that's part of ethics, but we define ethics as answering the question, how then should we live? And so the minute you pose it in that way, you see that ethics is not just hot button issues, although it includes those, but it's much, much bigger issues of how then should we live, and which actually makes it really exhilarating because it alerts us to the fact that the gospel, while the gospel is certainly about personal salvation and coming to a living faith in Christ, it's about far, far more than that, and encompasses the whole of life and encompasses every aspect of our personal and societal lives. So that's the kind of vision. And thank you for quoting that. I mean, my friends and colleagues really love that CLICE is about a celebration of life. Because when you read the creation story in Genesis, at every point as God reviews what he has created, whether it's animals or sea or land and stars and the moon and human beings, he says it's good, it's good, it's good, it's very good.
Yeah.
And so, if God is able to say that about his creation, we ought to be able to say that as well.
So
and then,
good. And
then that leads to celebrating life. Yeah.
We're going to be hitting on a lot of this stuff today in connection with a new book that he's just co-authored. But before, I'm going to hit you with a few of these books that he's authored. He's authored a ton, but written, edited, co-authored. So one of them is Contours of the Kuyperian Tradition. Another one is Introducing Biblical Hermeneutics. When You Want to Yell at God, the Book of Job. And then The True Story of the Whole World, Finding Your Place in the Biblical Drama, which is co-authored with Michael Goheen, which has been revised and streamlined edition coming out December 1st. Hope to have Dr. Goheen on to discuss that. And then a book I've been anticipating for literally 9 months. And by far, here comes that ear tickle, best book of 2020. Without a doubt, in my opinion. It's one that he co-authored with the brilliant and kind Bruce Ashford, and just released today, November 10th, The Doctrine of Creation, A Constructive Kuyperian Approach, IVP Academic. And just before we jump in, we partner with IVP Academic, and we're going to be giving away 2 copies of the book. So just go to the Layman's Lounge Facebook or Instagram and follow us and tag a friend, and you'll be entered to win. So gonna jump in with you, Dr. Bartholomew. And by the way, thank you. Seriously, thank you for joining us.
Oh, yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I just wish that I could, be there face to face and enjoy Honolulu, because I'm in Britain and we're heading into winter, so it's cold and chilly.
We need you out here. We need to be sipping on a Mai Tai together and jumping off some cliffs. As far as the book, I love how you guys said, and I'm going to quote here, the doctrine of creation is like Moses and the burning bush. It is one before which we should take off our shoes, for we stand on holy ground. Real quick, I'm just going to read that again, listener. The doctrine of creation is like Moses and the burning bush. It's one before which we should take off our shoes, for we stand on holy ground. End quote. So after reading the book, I see why you would paint that picture to our senses, Dr. Bartholomew. And then in the introduction, you guys mentioned that sort of, in a sense, quote, many of us need to defamiliarize ourselves with the doctrine of creation, which we too often take for granted, end quote. So all of that to say, Dr. Bartholomew, in what ways have most of us sort of like mishandled, treated as common, or ignored to our detriment the reality of creation? And in doing so, what have we been missing?
Oh, yes. Well, I think we've been missing all the good things, but let me just give you a little bit of my story, which may help you to understand why this is so tremendously important. So, I mean, I'm a committed evangelical Christian, and I grew up in South Africa during the era of racist apartheid, okay? And I grew up in a nominally Christian home, which meant you went to the Anglican church, maybe at Christmas, maybe at Easter, but really not a home where there was a living faith. And then at the age of 14, I was very, very thoroughly converted, which changed my life completely. And it was through the realization that the Christianity is about a relationship with God. It's not just about doing good things and being a good person. It's about coming into a living relationship with God. So I was thoroughly converted into South African evangelicalism. And, there was so much about that evangelicalism that was good. So it was totally committed to evangelism. It was totally committed to church planting and so on and so forth. But it really embodied what I would call a church view rather than a world view. So, if you want me to elaborate on this vocabulary, you must just tell me. But it had bought very deeply into a sacred secular dualism. So what that meant was that if you were really committed to God, then the primary thing was being involved in church activities, and the most important thing was evangelism. And and this it made it just really tough for me as a young, reserved adolescent in a non-Christian home. I was playing a lot of competitive tennis, and all I was taught all the time was that the big thing is just verbal evangelism, right, and the most important thing is church involvement, and the rest of life was like, well, businessmen are useful because they make a lot of money, then they can contribute to the church. And, if you're really committed to God, you'll become a missionary or a pastor. So it was this very, very narrow view. And I think what was particularly dangerous from that, it had nothing to say to the racism that was endemic in our culture. So, the whole of, if you want, I mean, there's a lot of discussion in America about this nowadays. And I think South Africa has so much to teach us, because if you want to know what white supremacy looks like when it's legislated in a country, that's what we had. So I went to a whites only school. I lived in a whites only neighborhood, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And here was this powerful Christianity, but it didn't open out to enable one to become fully human. And it certainly, you know, if you spoke about, well, you know, it's really important to address racism, that was becoming liberal.
Right.
So it was wonderful in all sorts of ways. I mean, it's now what was missing in all of that, and I think the answer is a robust doctrine of creation. So, you know, all Christians believe in creation. I mean, if we say the Apostles' Creed, which some of us still do, we say, you know, we believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. But in practice, what a lot of evangelicals do is they rush so fast to the cross and the resurrection that they bypass creation. And if you do that, you end up with a very truncated, narrow view of redemption and the purpose of the cross and of salvation. And you end up reducing it to the salvation of my soul. Now, of course, that is of critical importance. But the whole point is that, you know, God's purposes are for the whole of his creation. And he doesn't just want to save your soul, he wants to save the whole of you.
Yeah.
And, you know, through the work of Christ on the cross, he's working, yes, to bring me back into a relationship with himself through Christ, but he's also working to recover his purposes for every aspect of his creation. So I think one of the, you know, so it has seemed to me for a long time that one thing that would help evangelicals so much nowadays is if they could recover a biblical, robust doctrine of creation. And you know, you referred to the phrase I used that this is like the burning bush. And now, why do I say that? Because if you go to a book like Revelation, you'll find that again and again, God is worshipped because he is the creator. So we refer to the doctrine of creation in this book as a doxological, a worship truth. You know, now we mustn't turn the creation into God. And I think so. I'm not suggesting that we go around hugging trees and so on and so forth, because, you know, we worship God, not the creation, but it is his handiwork. And therefore we need to honor it and enjoy it and develop it to enhance his reputation.
So good. I want to return again to the intro where you guys said, quote, much recent work on Christian spirituality has recognized the role of ordinary, the everyday, and this too is rooted in creation, end quote. And so this is huge because most of us are not, like, literally most Christians are not Bible professors or pastors or even artists or trendsetters, you know, like high, quote, quote, high culture, right? Which as a side note, I feel like the Kuyperian tradition, it's hard to nuance it even more to like sort of examples of culture making as far as like, you know, those super simple nuanced things. But anyways, yeah, the bulk of us are appliance salesmen, logistic coordinators, busy moms, so forth. So in what ways, Dr. Bartholomew, have you seen the doctrine of creation really like get a hold of an ordinary and everyday Christian, or even yourself in the mundane comings and goings?
Yeah, so thank you for drawing attention to that, Jason, because I think this is tremendously important. So the theologian that I worked with used to say that the sort of materials of our everyday life, so looking after the young child, the stress of being a parent, organizing your home, being a father or a mother or a son or a daughter, caring for your grandparents or being a grandparent, the way you relate to your neighbors. These are sort of the ordinary things of our life. Now, a danger in much evangelical spirituality, especially the sacred secular dualism, is we only really being spiritual when we're doing those mountaintop things.
Absolutely.
So it's like we're only really being spiritual when we're doing the evangelistic crusade or going on a retreat or so on. Whereas my theologian friend would say, which is absolutely right, all those mundane things, the ordinary things of everyday life, what we eat, what we drink, how we look after our home, how we do our garden, those are the materials out of which we build the cathedral of our worship of God.
Nice.
So, and, another thing the doctrine of creation teaches us, so the famous church father Augustine has this saying, which I really love, that God is more on our inside than we are ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And Christians confess the doctrine of the omnipresence of God, but we don't always think about this. But that means, God is, he's all over his creation. So in other words, not only is creation a burning bush, but, everyday life, the ordinary, and that's true for all of us. Even if you're a rock star or you're the president or whatever, you still have the glory of ordinary human life.
Yeah.
And so I think we really, really need to recover that, because then we can start to ask, how do I practice homemaking? How do I look after my garden? How do I decide which car to drive? How do I parent? How do I live as a citizen in a way that brings glory to God? And then, the other church father who I love is Irenaeus. And Irenaeus has this saying, the glory of God is the human person fully alive.
Nice.
And this is, so, what I found with that sacred secular dualism, that it kind of, it made me a strange sort of religious person.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't open up the fullness of my humanity.
Wow.
Whereas I think what the Spirit wants to do is to help us to become, fully ourselves, fully human.
Mm.
And it's a famous, the first head of the art department at the Free University of Amsterdam, Hans Rookmaker, he used to ask his students this question, which I always love to ask my students: why does God save us? Now, what he meant by that was not what is God's motivation in saving us, but to what end does God save us? And here is his answer, which I think is worth its weight in gold. God saves us in order to make us fully human.
Yes. Yes.
So, now this, I think, is truly good news, gospel, evangelion. So not that we this is not a license to become selfish, but it means that if the Spirit is really at work in our lives, we will celebrate life.
And it makes sense, Dr. Bartholomew, especially like those questions that you were asking. You were saying, well, how do I cultivate my garden? How do I run my family? How do I coach this soccer team? How do I paint this painting or whatever? Those really are the questions. Some of the questions people are asked are, yeah, where am I going to go when I die? But that's one of many questions. And I think, yeah, it's been reduced to everyone's like, do you know where you're going to go if you were to die tonight? But that's that's also truncating the gospel message because it's reducing it to that one thing. But I did want to talk about in the chapter you guys had on creation and culture, you guys rightly diagnosed a serious issue in the lives and thinking of many Christians, an issue that I spent literally most of my own Christian life completely withered under. When you guys said, quote, Christians split their time between two realms. In the natural realms, they have families, workplaces, schools, leisure, political interactions, and so forth. In the realm of grace, however, they have the church, theology, and devotional lives. The latter realm is higher and more important than the former. So, end quote. This diagnosis is sadly like spot on accurate, but why has this pandemic thinking been center stage as our default belief and operating system?
Yeah, well, and of course, that's a very, very good question. And so I think one would have to look at how did this, so what you've put, so I spoke earlier about a sacred secular dualism, and that's where you divide life up into sacred activities, so church and evangelism, and then secular, so family, what you do, in your work and all those kind of things. Now, what you've just fingered, another way of calling this is a nature-grace dichotomy. So then, sacred activities are on the grace side, and nature activities like, having to eat, having to drink, look after children, have children, family, that's on the nature side. So this dichotomy, I think you can trace it back historically. And then, of course, in especially early 20th century evangelicalism, this thing really took very, very strong hold. Now, sometimes it's been an understandable reaction to a type of liberalism which does the reverse, almost saying, look, the only thing that matters is nature. So that's, politics, environment, all that sort of thing. And then grace isn't so important. So if you're not careful, the pendulum sort of swings back and forward. But it's a very pernicious, if it's incorrectly understood. And one of the things I think we say in that chapter is the crucial thing is how you understand grace in relationship to nature. And by nature there, we mean the way God has made his world, And our answer is, which I think is the biblical answer, is creation is fundamentally good. And sin is like a parasite on the goodness of that creation.
Yeah.
And what grace is the medicine to get rid of the parasite and to lead the creation to the destiny that God always intended for it.
Good news. That is good news.
Now that the important thing is that doesn't detract for a moment from the role of the church and those activities that we rightly see as absolutely crucial. But it does mean we have to rethink how church fits within the larger context of life as a whole. So, for example, if you're a pastor and you experience, you realize, oh my goodness, all of life is under the lordship of Christ, not just church life, then it should start to really change your preaching. So we can talk more about that, Jason, if you want to. But I think, the stuff, Jesus said of his disciples, which was truly a prophetic thing. When you think of that motley crew and then you think of us today, you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world. Now, the whole idea of salt, it can only be that if it's rubbed deeply into the meat. And it's no use having light where there's no darkness. I mean, you need darkness for the light to dispel it.
Yeah.
So the big, so this nature grace stuff or the sacred secular thing, what they do is they restrain our personal lives, and then they prevent us from being, in my language, carrying the Christ light into the world. So we really do need to get these things right. And I do think one of the ways to get it right is recover a robust doctrine of creation.
Right.
Yeah.
So even when we do see this clearly, what you're saying, like a proper understanding of the this like sacred, this false dichotomy of sacred, secular, and what's really valuable and whatever, even in the midst of that, don't judge me, Dr. Bartholomew, personally, I still have this like driving and deeply rooted sense of my need to be like doing stuff for God. And when I say stuff, I mean like the Christian stuff, the sacred stuff that we just diagnosed, that the quote quote secular stuff literally could be that. So this religious realm mentioned above. So I think at the end of the day, right or wrong, I just, like, to be honest, I feel way more spiritual if I'm reading a book or having a Christian conversation. So I had a few questions about that to pose to you. How have you addressed that in your own personal life, or even others around you? Like, early on, these things are newer to me. Early on, did you sort of struggle with that, and maybe students have brought this to you? Or
Yeah, no, I mean, I think as I referred to, so I was converted into this very, very alive evangelicalism, which was wonderful. And I think, in my book, Contours of the Caperian Tradition, I discuss this a bit, because Capper says this, and he goes back to Calvin, and it goes back to the church fathers, who say God is our father and the church is our mother. Now, whether you like that metaphor or not is not the point. The point is, and this is my development of that thinking, when you become a Christian, you're like a baby, okay, or a child. And what the church does, absolutely understandably, it mediates the voice of the Father to you. So if you think of your early days, Jason, when you became a Christian, so I became a Christian at 14, you just, all you want to do is to live for God and serve God, okay? Now the question is, how do you do that? And it's the church as your mother who tells you through the preaching and the teaching, this is how you do it, okay? Now, what they did, in my context in South Africa, of course, that we took the Bible very seriously. It was preached all the time, but it was preached through the lens of a sacred secular dualism. Now, the problem is when you're a baby Christian, quite understandably, you are unable to distinguish the voice of the church, which is your mother, from the voice of the Father by the Spirit through the Word.
wow.
Okay, so, and there's something about that which is absolutely normal. So, you've come alive, and it's through the ministry of the church. So you just embrace what you hear from the pulpit uncritically as, this is the voice of the Father. And of course, God speaks and God works. But as you mature, and so, for me, part of that maturing was, how is it that I'm in the midst of a Christian community that is so alive, and it says that you've got to love your neighbor as yourself. I have racism staring me in the face every day, but it never has anything to say about that. Is that the Father speaking, or is that the mother misinterpreting the Father? So, but the problem is that through the ministry of the church, which of course is incredibly important and very formative, just like our families are, You know, as they often say to you, oh, you know, you're a chip off the old block. We have this saying in England, you're just like your father or your mother. And sometimes when we grow up, we realize, oh my goodness, that's true. We thought we were escaping our parents, but like our parents. But so this stuff goes very deep. So in the formative stages of our life as Christians, we imbibe this, and at that stage, we're unable to make a critical distinction between the voice of the mother and the voice of the father.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, for me, it was especially living in apartheid South Africa, and you know, we're literally, I mean, we were confronted every day with racism, you know, and of the worst sorts imaginable. And then the evangelical church, there were some important exceptions, but on the whole, the evangelical church in South Africa had nothing to say to that racism.
So, I'm sorry, did I cut you off? Did you have more?
No. We, you know, there's so much we want to talk about, so you just jump in. Yeah.
No, how can we as Christians literally actually please God? So like if the moment that we get off this call, or the listener wakes up in the morning and they want to bring joy to the Father, be pleasing to him, what must we do? What can we do? Can we go out and hunt down a medium that allows us to be pleasing to the Father? Should we, or if we were in South Africa back then, should we organize a rally? But what about a busy mom? What could she have done? Or what if, yeah.
Yeah, so I think the good news of when you recover a robust doctrine of creation, it doesn't change at all the fundamentals of your faith. It affirms them. It just makes them ever so much bigger. So let me just take a very simple thing, an expression of the Apostle Paul's, which I absolutely love, the obedience of faith. Okay. Now, I'm quite sure, especially if your listeners are captive to a sacred secular dualism, when they hear that word obedience, it's not the kind of thing that you think, oh, how wonderful. It's much more that the guilt and all this stuff, I'm a lazy parent, and, I'm not doing enough for the church, and I only go to Bible study once a week.
That's literally almost everyone.
Yeah. So, now which is just terrible. So the obedience of faith means bringing the whole of your life under the rule of King Jesus. And when you understand that against the backdrop of the doctrine of creation, that obedience, like the Ten Commandments, there's one author who I absolutely love. He describes the Ten Commandments as the ethos of the good neighborhood.
Nice.
You see, but if you're sacred secular, the Ten Commandments, it's, oh, I've screwed up again, bad, more church activities, more those sort of things. Whereas when you start to think of the Ten Commandments as this is how to have the greatest neighborhood, this is how to have a neighborhood where you've got real neighbors, where your children can play in the streets and they're safe. Where a black kid can play next to a white kid and it's fantastic, and you're barbecuing with your neighbors.
Totally. That is a glimpse of the kingdom.
Oh man, the kingdom, that's right. And so see, obedience, another synonym in Mark's gospel for becoming a Christian, is entering the kingdom. So obedience is coming under the rule of the king. Now, you've just got to open these things up. Well, who is this king? Well, this is King Jesus, who's come to rescue the whole creation. This is King Jesus, through whom the Father is going to recover his purposes for all dimensions of the creation. So the obedience of faith is not some dreadful disfiguration of my humanity. It's getting my humanity along the grain of the creation so that I can be fully alive. So that means, for example, let's think of the stressed out mom and all of us who live with so much stress. It means having an obedient emotional life. Now, what does that look like? It means a healthy emotional life. It means having an obedient sexual life. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means within the marriage bond, sexuality is to be fully and creatively enjoyed. It means to have, and so we could go through every aspect of what it means to be human. So with the stressed out mom, it means where she can take time out so she can rest a bit and be still.
Wow.
And develop the most healthy ways of parenting, so that parenting can be not just difficult, but also the wonderful joy and privilege that it is. It would mean things like make sure that you are neither overindulging your children nor so strict that, in Paul's language, you frustrate them. Now, so in other words, healthy boundaries within the relationships. Now, what does that result in? It results in shalom, peace. It's what I refer to as the celebration of life.
So, I mean, that's very compelling. And it brings up a question for me. I know a few Buddhist hippies who do those things well. So what makes a Christian busy mom who is operating in those realities versus a Buddhist hippie mom? What makes if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so one thing is, and Abram Kuyper or Kaper, however you say this, is very clear on this. I was quite amazed that he is so clear that often non-Christians do things much better than we do. Now this shouldn't surprise us. I mean, God makes the sun and the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. So, and Augustine famously said, all truth is God's truth. Now, whatever that means, it does mean that, the hippie is a person made in the image of God. And one Reformed theologian who I quote a lot in this book said, all of human life is a response to God. Even when it's rebellion, it's still responding to God. And I think, not that I've ever been a hippie, but if I think of hippies, there are things to learn from them. So one of the things hippies have done is they've tried to get off the treadmill of manic activism. So there's something we could all learn from.
Yeah.
Okay. But the other thing they've done, is generally a celebration of free sex, the use of drugs, and all sorts of things like that. Well, please don't learn that from them, because that's going to come back and whack you over the head.
Because at that moment, they're living sort of subhuman as they're doing, like, to be sin, as I think, like you were saying, is to basically be less human. The last thing in this realm of this question where I'm asking you, can you give us, I'm really putting you on blast here, I'm sorry, but can you give us sort of a theological commentary, a sort of God's eye view, play by play on the case study of a normal, like we're talking normal, a normal Christian dad? He just dropped his kids off at school. He's on the way to work. He's going to grab a coffee at Starbucks, and then he's headed to, and then he'll get to his job. He's going to sell refrigerators for 9 hours. He's going to be nice to some of the people. He's going to like gossip probably about a few of them, like his workmates, but he sort of wishes he didn't, but sometimes he enjoys it. Then he's going to go home. Just a classic. And he wasn't able, and it's a Tuesday, so he doesn't have Bible study that night. And we didn't start with him reading the Bible. We just started with him dropping his kids off.
No. So I think, so of course, there's so much to say about this. And see, this is the good news, because once you have the big picture in view, the question you've just asked me is maybe the most important question you'll ask in this interview. Because it's dealing with the daily, data of an ordinary human being, as we all are. And see, the terrible thing with the sacred secular dualism, it will say to such a person, your life is only meaningful when you, on top of what you're doing, which we're not very interested in,
Right.
you spend all your spare time at the church. So whereas what I would, these are the conversations I enjoy more than anything else. So first of all, this man has woken up to the doctrine of creation, and so he's a father. So suddenly, being a good father, what an extraordinary calling. And see, it's the ordinary. I learned from some of the mentors I've had that I can interact with a person in the coffee shop or in the queue at the supermarket that brings life. Or I can interact with people in those contexts in a way that brings death.
Wow.
So first of all, we see our guy dropping his kids off at school. Now, some days it's just going to be crazy and he's literally going to have to kick them out the door because they're late. It's going to be chaos. And, that's just part of life. But it's not what he aspires to. So, when he drops them off at school, him and his wife have made sure that they're well prepared for the school day. So that they're not stressed out thinking I haven't done my homework, I haven't got my gym clothes or anything. The homemaking thing is in place. So these are children who live in a home where they're deeply loved, which means there's also very good boundaries. And so it's with enormous joy in a way, and with a full heart, that the father is able to wish his children goodbye. And they know that when he comes home that evening, he's going to really want to know what their day was like.
Wow.
Because he's interested in their lives.
Yeah.
And, we delegate the schooling and the formation of our children to schools, but it's still our responsibility. So even at that first stop, is poignant. And there'll be other kids there who are being dropped off with families where, the only thing that matters is making a ton of money, and their lives are chaotic and it's miserable. But not these kids, because they may not have a stack of money in the home, but they are deeply, deeply loved. So there we are. Now then he stops at the coffee shop. Now, I think you said he goes to Starbucks. Okay, I'm going to change that a bit. He knows that there's a friend of his has opened a coffee shop who resources really good coffees from all over the world. And this friend has introduced our friend to, the sheer joys of excellent coffee. Okay. So he stops, and because it's a local store, he's really got to know the personnel. So apart from being able to order his favorite coffee, pour over, or however it's prepared, and they tell him where these beans came from, and that it's fair trade and all these wonderful things. So he has the best coffee at the beginning of the day. Again, he's connected deeply relationally into his community. Wow. And then off he goes to work. Now, we may, if I was a pastor, I would want to have a conversation with him about, what his gifts are and what he may be called to. But let's assume that he is a very good salesperson. But, his motivation is different. His motivation, unlike far too many people in the West, is not just to make profit. So he actually knows about fridges. So he knows which fridges are the most environmentally friendly, which are the best energy savers. I mean, he's one of these weird guys who's really into fridges, you know. And so what he sees his work is not just as a job, but as a vocation. That the humble fridge, which is a glorious thing, by the way, if we didn't have fridges, we'd know all about that. The humble fridge, he is your man when you're looking for a fridge. And he's not out there just to get you to buy the most expensive fridge. He's very interested in the type of fridge you need. And bigger is not necessarily better. And he will help you to find one that is the best energy saving. Maybe he'll alert you to the ones that are made in America, if such things still exist. But he's your guy when you want a really, really good fridge. And so his job is not just to make money so he can then enjoy life. His job is providing a service for the community so that they can look after food and eat healthily.
Wow.
So, so if you just let me finish.
No, please go.
Do you see what I mean? There is glory written over this ordinary day of this very ordinary man.
Yeah.
He's in the service of the Lord Christ. He's a full-time service of the Lord Christ, who in his own way is seeking to enhance the reputation of Jesus in every part of his creation. And so he goes home at the end of the day. The kids are waiting to meet him. He himself has a very good fridge. And so there's fresh produce on the table. And then, maybe very humbly, but then he can ask those kids that he loves so much, now, tell me about your day.
Yes. Amen. Amen, Pastor. Thank you. Like that. That's the life. As a side note, I just want the listeners to know that you guys speak in the book often about like food sourcing and eating. And when I just say that, you're probably like, I'm not interested in that. But I think you guys even somewhere you quote someone who says like, I cannot believe that eating isn't one of the main things that we have a doctrine about, because we do it constant. Anyways, so the book is so good. It's a very complete treatment of creation and implications. And a double side note, I'm currently sipping on some fine Kyperian coffee. It's a little business that I own. So go to KyperianCoffee.com. I've never plugged it, but since we're talking about good coffee, since we're talking about a Kyperian and ethically sourced coffee, please go to KyperianCoffee.com and get yourself.
Oh, yeah, no. Well, as you know, can we finish the interview now so I can go there?
So what you're saying, this is all well and good, especially the case study of that's actually a case study of our co-host. He's a appliance salesman, but he couldn't be with us today. But this understanding of the creation mandate and creating culture and human flourishing. But I hear this often, since the fall, hasn't the creation mandate been eclipsed, neutralized, wiped out, fulfilled in Jesus by the Great Commission mandate?
Yeah, so this is a very, very good question, and it's another way of getting us into this, into the heart of things, So, and I think, so there are many, many ways into this, and maybe, the most helpful thing for your listeners is to make them aware that when you read the Bible, you read it through the glasses, the spectacles that your mother has given you, your mother being the church. That's normally the way we read it, okay? So, but we don't, the problem now, Jason, you and I wear glasses, and I think you will understand fully with me the worst thing about glasses is, where are they? Now then sometimes they're on my head and I'm looking for them all over the place. And the thing about glasses is you don't, if you're constantly aware of them, they'd be useless. You look through them at the world, okay? And when you read the Bible, you look through a lens, a framework. Now, if that's a sacred secular framework, what tends to happen is you read the Bible through that lens and you read the sacred secular framework in, and then you're very excited when it comes back to you. Okay. So we can just, you can start to unravel this in all sorts of ways, but let's take the Great Commission in Matthew's Gospel. So first of all, here we have Jesus, the risen Jesus. Now, could you just pause for a moment? He's risen, he's physically risen, he's a material being. Okay, we know that in his resurrection appearances, he did wonderful things like when his disciples were fishing, he made a barbecue on the shore so that they could have a meal together. And by the way, that's real meal with fish and real food, So this is the risen Jesus, and it's a physical bodily resurrection, as will ours be. Now, if it's a physical bodily resurrection, that brings with it all the dimensions of our humanity. So then secondly, what does he say to his disciples? He says, all authority on heaven and on earth is given to me. In other words, he's king, not just over our spirits and our souls, but he's the rightful king over the whole of the creation. And then he says to the disciples, now there are different ways of translating this. The way I like to translate it is, go and disciple the nations. Now, a disciple was someone, of course, who attached themselves to a guru in Jesus' day and became a sort of carbon copy of them, if you like, through imbibing their teaching and their lifestyle and everything. Now, this is the most incredible picture. Go and teach the nations how to follow Jesus. Now, do you know what that reminds me of? Is the way the book of Psalms begins. And there's a widespread agreement now that Psalms 1 and 2 are deliberately the introduction to the Psalter. And what is so instructive is Psalm 1 begins with the individual. Blessed is, in the Hebrew, the man, singular, the person. What happens in Psalm 2, it's what one author says, you've got the tumult of the nations. Now, do you know what the message of those two Psalms are? Whether it's the individual or nations, they are both subject to God's Torah, his instruction, his law. And it's the same thing we find in the Great Commission. All authority on heaven and on earth is given to me. So I think the Great Commission is a recovery in its own way of the cultural mandate. It's going and proclaiming and embodying the news of Jesus throughout the whole creation.
Amen.
And, just at a very practical level, what I found as a reserved adolescent, because, I was so committed to Christ, the conversion was so powerful. All I wanted to do was to follow Jesus. And then the way it was mediated to me is that means every church activity. It means a very vocal, verbal evangelism. And, I was a reserved teenager going on secular tennis tours and, with this overwhelming burden of evangelism that I didn't know how. Then when I was a student at Oxford, what I did was at a certain point, I realized now please don't take this in the wrong way, but if I stop worrying about evangelism and concentrate on building friendships and being human, I then had more opportunities for real evangelism than I'd ever had in my life.
So good. So
So you see the obedience of faith, it's as we are under the reign of Christ, becoming fully human, that will call forth questions, as Peter says. And then in a very human way, instead of forcing a conversation, we can tell them about Jesus.
I want to share a quote that you said. I don't think this is from the book, something else, either another book you wrote. I forgot where I put it, but you said, as evangelicals, we're in such haste to get to the cross and resurrection, which I fully understand, but we bypass the doctrine of creation, and we thereby end up with a diminished doctrine of the person and work of Christ. So Christ, yeah, anyways, that's a great quote. Running out of time, I always have more questions, but this is the best interview we've ever had. So I had some questions to lead up to this one, but I really want to get it to you. I hope it doesn't stress you out, but here it is. How helpful or harmful, then, is the confessional statement that the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever? If you were to sit down and say, what is the chief end of man, and I asked you to write it, would you probably write it in that same way?
I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. And I think your question is so good. Now, I'm not a Presbyterian, so it doesn't freak me out at all.
Right. That's true. Let's
That
talk about those prayers. Yeah.
The phone's going to start ringing straight away saying you're fired because you undermined the Westminster Catechism or whatever. But I think, you see, the point is, so the quote about rushing to the cross, that is from an interview about the book, which people can find on the Kleist website. And Jason, if I can just mention to all your listeners, until the end of December, IVP Academic in the USA are offering anyone connected with us a 30% discount on the book.
Wow.
So if any of your listeners go to our website, and I'd love them to sign up for our newsletters, but they'll find there the events that are advertised, and there's a code they can find. And then you just go to IVP and you order the book and insert the code, and then you'll get your 30% discount.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's really good. But see, your question is so good, because not only do we rush to the cross and therefore diminish it, we end up with a diminished understanding of what it means to be human. And that is where, so this stuff we're talking about, it really, really matters. Because if you get it wrong, it can screw up your life.
Totally.
And it can make you a very weird person.
Yeah.
And it can crush your humanity instead of opening up your humanity. So I think, I love this statement, to glorify God and enjoy him forever. But what I want to talk about is, what does that mean? Because you see, again, if you're working with sacred secular, to glorify God means to spend every day in church type activities.
Exactly.
Whereas for me, to glorify God is, I know, for example, that in Britain where I live, I'm surrounded by farms, but they're agribusiness farms. So all the hedgerows where the birds used to flourish have been destroyed, and there's insecticides everywhere. So the new home for birds is the suburban garden like mine. So one way I glorify God is by tending my little gorgeous enclosed garden, so that it's a place where bird life can flourish. And see, I think when we have this bigger vision, then we can begin, just as Jesus has his baptism, the heavens break open and the Spirit descends and says, this is my beloved. It's when we have this bigger vision and we are becoming more fully human, then we too can hear the Father saying of us, this is my beloved.
Thank you, Lord.
And that's good news. It's really, really good news.
So released today is the doctrine of creation, a constructive Kuyperian approach, IVP academic, and like we said, we're going to be giving away 2 copies of that. So go to Layman's Lounge Facebook or Instagram, and Dr. Bartholomew is doing some great work along with the rest of the Ahana over there at the Kirby Lang Center for Christian Ethics. So please do take a few minutes to go to their site, which is www.klice with a K, KLICE, klice.co.uk, and that's where you could leverage that discount that you referenced. And also there's a at the end of this month, a sort of, I think there's like 8 or 9 of you, and even one of my old professors is actually going to be on that, sort of doing a presentation around the book. They're going to be touching on things like creation and jazz music. So
is that your professor?
Yeah. Okay. So anyways,
Jeff.
Yeah, exactly. What's up, Dr. Mooney? I just want to say thank you so much for this. As we close out, if people have been stirred in this and they're kind of like, yes, this is so true, this is good, and then as soon as they leave, they're gonna be like, wait a minute, what do I do? What's up? Is there a one-liner or some truth that I could replay through my head as I go about my day, dropping my kids off, going to Starbucks, selling refrigerators, changing the kids' diapers, so forth?
Yeah, I think so. And, maybe one could just say, so there are many things one could say. What I would say is from Psalm 46, be still and know. So, the problem with creation is we're immersed in it. And we're so immersed in it that we don't see it. So the thing to do is to slow down so you can actually become attentive and start to see it. So who would have thought that dropping your kids off at school is a moment of glory? But see, if you can slow down and become attentive to it, then it's like spots of light start to appear. And then you will discover, as Gerald Manley Hopkins said of Christ, that he plays in 10,000 places. And he's playing all over your life. But so be still. And then another thing you may want to pray from the Psalms is, open my eyes, Lord.
Thank you, Dr. Bartholomew, so much.
That's a pleasure, Jason. It's wonderful to be with you. And I'm still envious that you're in Honolulu and I'm in cold Britain.
We came for salvation. We came for family. We came for all that's good. That's how we'll walk away. We came to break the bad. We came to cheer the sad. We came to